I'm here in Port Richmond, Staten Island, and I'm going to tell you the story of Polly Bodine. I'm going to be using this book by Hortis, The Witch of New York, as my guide. It's a little noisy here, cars and traffic, but you see back behind me the restaurant. It used to be the side of a Perkins when I was growing up in the 80s, and now it's a different kind of cuisine, different restaurant. Perkins was torn down. It's the first time I've been over here in years, and what this is significant for is being the property of George Houseman, the brother of Mary Polly Bodine. And this is where it all started. This is where the story started, where Emmeline Houseman and her daughter Annalisa were murdered and the house set on fire. Across the way, up the road, the gray house, that was the home of Mary Polly Bodine, where her parents lived and she lived. And this whole property, this whole area was known as Granite Village. It was the town of oystermen and other people, farms. This whole area, everybody knew, tight-knit community, everybody knew one another. And when the fire started in the home right here behind me, everybody saw it happening, thought it up, and tried to get in there and rescue whomever. And they found, unfortunately, the bodies of Annalisa, who was 14 to 18 months. I'll double check that and drop it in the video. And Emmeline. We're going to go visit them at Fairview Cemetery in this next recording and show you where they're buried and that cemetery, and visit different sites that's on Staten Island related to this case. And I'll narrate and illustrate different things regarding the story, as I said, using this book, which if you're interested in this case from Christmas night of 1843, then it's the book to read. Here I am at the historic Richmondtown in Staten Island, where the Historical Museum is, home of the Staten Island Historical Society. And as you see coming up right there is the courthouse, where the famous Staten Island trial for Mary Polly Bodine took place. And I'll offer some narration and text in the video here. But I wanted to take a little tour, a little walking tour of this historic place if you've never seen it before. Just show you some of the buildings. As you hear, there's traffic and noise in the background. Can't be helped. Staten Island's a busy place. Overpopulated in my opinion. And I spent a lot of time here at historic Richmondtown as a child growing up. Now we used to take trips, see different events here. And if you look at their calendar on their website, there's lots of historical events taking place, walkthroughs, different time periods of the year, especially the fall. There's lots of things going on. And, like I said, this is the courthouse where Polly Bodine was tried.
The images you see are not the real Polly Bodine. In May 2024, author Alex Hortis held a mock trial in the same courtroom Polly was tried in the Richmond County Courthouse, which is now within historic Richmondtown. Alex Hortis played the part of presiding Judge Parker. The funeral for Emmeline Houseman and her daughter Annalisa, the patriarch of the Van Pelt family, father to Emmeline and grandfather to Annalisa, John Van Pelt, declared his belief that Mary Polly Bodine was the murderess. Christmas night, 1843, in serene Granite Village, the Houseman home was ablaze. After fire had been extinguished, investigators discovered Emmeline Van Pelt Houseman and her daughter Annalisa under a mattress, which had been set up in the kitchen to keep them close to the wood-burning stove during the cold winter months. Murder was suspected when investigators found that Emmeline had been bound and that her limbs had defensive wounds. Furthermore, both Emmeline and the baby had suffered crushing blows to their skulls. In a perverse nativity, someone bludgeoned to death a mother and a child in their home, and then covered up the crime with hellfire. Mary Polly Bodine was arrested on January 1st, 1844 for the murders of her sister-in-law, 20-month-old and 20-month-old niece. Also accused was her paramour George Waite, who ran an apothecary in Lower Manhattan. George was charged as an accessory when Annalisa's coral bead necklace was found in his apothecary. Both the accused were housed in the courthouse jail. Polly's son Albert was an apprentice under George's guidance. He was compelled to testify against them both. The trial began on June 23, 1844. Prosecution provided accounts of Emmeline's and Bodine's movements on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, providing a timeline that established not only that Bodine had the opportunity, but that she might also have been responsible for selling some items that had been taken from the Houseman home before the fire. Against the mounting circumstantial evidence, defense attorneys presented witnesses who testified that Emmeline was alive on Christmas Day and therefore could not have been murdered by Bodine on Christmas Eve. This didn't satisfy prosecutors, who couldn't establish Bodine's whereabouts on the following evening. She had not stayed with a friend, as she had told her son. Defense attorneys later contended that it had been an innocent lie. Bodine had not wanted to tell her son that she was staying with Waite. The jury on Staten Island seemed of one mind as to Polly's guilt, but were reticent to submit a verdict of guilty, as it would condemn her to the gallows. Executing a woman in polite 1844 society seemed unthinkable for one juror, who leapt from the deliberation room window rather than participate. The jurors took 2 days before declaring that they could not reach a verdict. In the case ending in a hung jury, with the jury unable to reach a verdict, Judge Amasa Parker dismissed the case, calling for a new trial in a new location, New York City. Polly was vacated from the jail at the county courthouse in Richmondtown and was transferred to Tombs in Manhattan. George Waite, Polly's paramour of several years, had absconded from New York after having escaped prosecution in the first trial. Waite had claimed that he had no idea how Annalisa's coral beads ended up in his shop. He had not been charged with the murders, but only as an accessory after the fact, to the dismay of the Van Pelt family, as Polly's family accused him as being the real killer. Additionally, Waite's alibi was Polly's own son, Albert, who had testified George was in his shop at the time of the murders. In my research, I cannot find any record, grave burial, or otherwise of what happened to George Waite, other than what Alex Hortis states in his book. After the first trial ended, he seems to have disappeared from all records. New York newspapers circulated in great numbers with the invention of the penny press, which reported constantly on the story, speculating about the accused motives openly. The sensational story of a scorned Staten Island murderess who may have plotted to kill her sister-in-law in conspiracy with her paramour, George Waite, overshadowed the circumstantial details of the case. This drew commentary from then-journalist for the Columbia Spy, Edgar Allan Poe, and Walt Whitman, who reported for The Sun. These accounts are easily found within Alex Hortis' book and online. A second trial was held before a Manhattan jury in March 1845. P.T. Barnum installed a wax figure of Polly in his nearby museum, calling Polly the Witch of New York. Barnum's tableau showed Bodine hacking her 2 victims to death. The relentless assaults in the papers and an outspoken Barnum continued well after the trial ended. Precious few jurors could be found in the greater New York area who had not read about the Witch of Staten Island and had formed an opinion about her assumed guilt or innocence. After 3 weeks, the jury found Polly guilty, but the state Supreme Court invalidated the verdict in May of 1845 and ordered yet another trial. The third and final trial was held in April 1846 in Newburgh, Orange County, New York, and found Polly Bodine innocent. After 2.5 years in jail, Polly was set free.
Here I am at Hillside Cemetery, coming around to the main entrance and gate. Friends of Abandoned Cemeteries Incorporated. Staten Island Hillside Cemetery, established 1828. Why there's areas of it painted over, I do not know, but it says Willowbrook Park Baptist Church Cemetery beautification made possible by a grant from the Richmond County Savings Foundation. Well, we're going to take a little tour through here, but first, I'm going to show you the graves of Emmeline and Annalisa Houseman. I had incorrectly said in the prior segment that they are buried in Fairview. That's actually where Polly Bodine is buried. So let me take you around and show you. rather than standing on the sidewalk and showing you the graves of Emmeline and Annalisa, excuse me, I'm going to walk up these steps and take you right to their plot. Excuse the noise in the background, lots of cars going around. Very busy roadway, Richmond Avenue. And right over here is where they're laid to rest. E.H. at the top. Emmeline, wife of George W. Houseman, died December 25th, 1843, age 24 years and 8 months, it looks like. I can't read the bottom, but I might be able to find some text elsewhere that it says what's below her name, probably a memorial. And then her daughter, Annalisa, daughter of George W. and Emmeline Houseman, died December 25th, 1843, age 1 year, and I can't see if that's 3 months or 8 months. But she was between 14 and 18 months. I'll clarify that from the research and drop it in. But she's here with her daughter, and her husband is buried elsewhere. He might be with the same cemetery that Polly's parents are buried at, which is the Dutch Reformed Church in another area of Staten Island, which I'll get to at another time, but drop into this video, which is rather sad. Her husband, who was away at sea, the whole town, Granite Village, was full of oystermen, as I said in the previous segment. And he was away, and the Bodines owned a lot of property and had a family history of oystering, and Polly Bodine was not estranged from that. She used to row boats, from what I've read, and was involved in a short way, but the sons of the family were the oystermen and went into the family business. Emmeline and Annalisa were home, and I'll drop in some text and narration about what exactly happened. But the night that this happened, Christmas night, 1843, the town and the local tavern noticed that the kitchen, the back end of the house, had caught on fire. And everybody rushed and was trying to put it out. And when they finally were able to reach and get into the property, they thought were animal bones, but were actually the remains of Emmeline and Annalisa. I'm here at the resting place, the grave of George Houseman. George Houseman, the brother of Mary Polly Bodine, is the husband of Emmeline Houseman, Emmeline Van Pelt Houseman, who was the victim with her daughter Annalisa of the house fire and murder, because it was subsequently found that she had blunt force trauma to her skull. She had what looked like something tied, a scarf or a handkerchief around her wrist that could have been bounding her. And it is surmised and talked about in this book, The Witch of New York, that someone was there to rob her and take money or take something from the home. And as we know from this book and other accounts that you can find online, that the accused, Mary Polly Bodine, pawned items, silverware and other items from the house at pawn shops in Manhattan. Now, whether we believe those accounts or not, or accept them from this book and other, but this is the book. This is the most concentrated understanding of the case that has ever been published. There's online accounts like the Staten Island Advent and historical accounts, but I highly suggest reading this to get a more detailed account. I'm just going to go paraphrase and kind of go over a little bit. But that happened in 1843, and George Houseman was a captain of a schooner. And I'm going to read a little bit from the book. Now, I'm not laying judgment. The man is at rest. I'm here at their resting place for his family, who I'll explain in a moment. But during the trial of Mary Bodine, Polly Bodine, if you will, the defense, her defense, called Captain George Houseman, and he, at the time, he sold a schooner, a ship, for $500, and he exchanged that money in New York City for silver quarter dollars, and he allegedly carried all those coins in a stuffed bag under his arm to his father's home in Granite Village. Now, earlier in this video, you saw the father's home, which was across the way from Emmeline Houseman and George Houseman's home. It was only separated by a meadow and a pear tree, and he carried all that to his father's home. The father, who had a farm and had sold that farm, had given his 8 children, like $1,000 apiece. So they had some money themselves, including Polly. And he was asked if his crew knew he had this money, and did it occur to George that by carrying a bag of silver under his arm, he was holding out a temptation to people to rob him. And he said he wasn't aware of that. And these were sensitive questions, ones which no attorney would dare ask, since it seemed to lay some blame for this tragedy on Captain Houseman's negligence in shielding his money. Now, it's the defense is trying to show that he brought this money to the house, and that someone might have known that he was doing that, and that therefore they went to his home and killed Emmeline and the daughter Annalisa and set the house on fire looking for this money. So they're trying to set the precedent that that was the case, potentially. And here in the book it says, a note on Captain George W. Houseman. All that is really known of George Houseman is that, he was on a schooner trip in December 1843 and was told of the Christmas fire from his sister Polly on the ferry ride of December 26th. Because she found out or knew of the fire and got on the ferry and headed to Manhattan. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is when she allegedly was carrying items to pawn. According to witnesses, he was initially reluctant about posting the reward and its amount, but he agreed after some discussion. On the witness stand, George testified in a neutral manner about what little he seemed to know. Although Judge Edmonds questioned the wisdom of him carrying around so much money, no one faulted him for anything more than carelessness. Captain Houseman never spoke to the press about the murders, and he never publicly accused Polly of the murders. Tabloid writers later used this to raise questions about him. In 1886, the New York World, a yellow journalism paper, published a smear piece entitled Polly Bodine's Brother. It claimed that during the trials, George Houseman purportedly remarked that a man can get another wife anytime, but he couldn't get another sister. Despite intense media coverage of Captain Houseman, no such quotation from him was published at the time of the trials, and it was almost certainly apocryphal. Judging how someone else grieves is fraught with peril. Few have ever suffered the extreme experience of having one's own sister accused of murdering one's wife and child. Although George never publicly accused Polly, it should be noted that, unlike her brother Abraham, George never publicly defended his sister either. George eventually remarried a young woman from Virginia, but that was common for widowed husbands in that era, and he did not remarry until almost 5 years later in September of 1848. There was no evidence to connect him to any cover-up, much less the horrific crimes. So, not laying any judgment, just for viewers to know what Alex Hortis has set up in this book to say and state from the record. He's going from trial records and first-hand accounts from attorneys on either side, court records, all of that. So it's good to go with his judgment. As a follow-up to my discussion, here's just some video of the headstones. Here's George W. His wife, Virginia, is here. They have the large headstone Houseman marking the plot, and the children I spoke of before. Is Clinton, Norris, and Ida, which unto itself is sad, because not only did he lose his first wife and child, Annalisa and Emmeline, but he remarries, starts another family, and the children pass. Like I said, if I find any more information on if this is the extent of their children, or if others, you know, became adults, married, had families themselves, what their stories are, I'll drop some text if I find anything, and pictures if I do so. Again, this is Moravian Cemetery in Staten Island, New York. I'm here in Fairview Cemetery, Staten Island, and this is where Mary Polly Bodine was laid to rest. The cemetery was established during her lifetime, 1852, some records 1872 when it was fully incorporated, so it's not quite clear. For 113 years, according to a book by Patricia Salmon, who's a noted Staten Island historian, Polly didn't have a headstone or any marker. She was in an unmarked grave. And even though she was semi-reclusive in her life after the trials, which the trials went from 1844 to 1846, her character had been demeaned and so she was sort of shunned from society. In 1847, there was a pamphlet that came out. They continued the news or the story of Polly Bodine, which alleged to be the complete trial and life of Polly Bodine, and it completely tore apart her character and continued the harassment, the demeaning of her character as established by P.T. Barnum during the trials, who had a wax figure established in his museum of hers, an old crone, and all this horrible stuff that happened and was said during the trials. So whether or not you accept that she did these murders, murdering Emmeline Houseman and her daughter Ann Eliza, her sister-in-law and niece, the husband of her brother, the wife of her brother, George Houseman, and her family attended the trials. George, who was always supportive, and her parents, especially after it was moved from Staten Island, and she supposedly was going to get a fair trial in Manhattan, and then it was moved into Newburgh, and she was acquitted. But the stories continued. The demeaning of her character, as I've said, when I was growing up, she was known as Staten Island's Lizzie Borden. And just a few short months later, 2 weeks I think it is, there was police called in Fall River, Massachusetts, to address the actual Lizzie Borden situation. So this happened all before the Lizzie Borden situation and what happened there. And we know those stories. But as a semi-recluse, avoiding society in numerous ways because of these trials and what happened with her, the tabloids tearing her apart, she wasn't given a fair trial or a fair shake in any of this. And she was buried in isolation in an unmarked grave. And I'll show you her grave in a moment, and the Housemans that are across from her. What's sad about this situation, Polly being in an unmarked grave for 113 years, is that she's buried across from Housemans. And these are later Housemans, burials from 1965, 1980, 2016. This looks like these could be a little later, 1862, 1843. I'm not quite sure. I can't read it correctly. It's a little faded. But like Emmeline Houseman and her daughter Ann Eliza, who are alone with no family in Hillside Cemetery, as you saw from the earlier segment, is that Polly was here by herself. Her brother is George Houseman, husband of Emmeline, is not buried in Hillside near his former wife because after she passed and the trials were over, he remarried and established his own family, had several kids, and is buried in Moravian Cemetery. And I'll get some pictures of his grave. That's not too far away from here. So Polly is by herself amongst these Housemans who could be later relations. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into their genealogy too deeply, but she's by herself. And it's rather sad. Shunned from society because of the trials, and unmarked for 113 years. This cemetery has a number of prominent Staten Island families, as I said earlier. It's a beautiful, quiet cemetery. And I will show you the grave of Polly Bodine, as I said, was unmarked. And it stood unmarked for 113 years, I had said previously. And the headstone later on was established by the Friends of Fairview Cemetery, who gave her the proper markers she should have had. But I understand why they didn't mark it, to alleviate curiosity seekers, anybody who might want to come and desecrate her grave or just see where she was buried. Because up until her death, she still had that reputation of the Witch of Staten Island. And here she is. Mary's children, Albert and Elizabeth, are not buried here with her. Albert went on to be a captain of a schooner and retired at Sailor's Snug Harbor, which is a whole other story and historical site on Staten Island, well worth investigation and historical perspective in my videos, and I'll share that in another video another day. But he is buried, from what I can find in records, in the Sailor's Snug Harbor Cemetery, which is adjacent in the back of the property of Sailor's Snug Harbor. I've been over there years ago. There's not a lot of headstones, so if I find it, I'll add it to this video. I do not know where her daughter Elizabeth Ann is buried. From what I can find, though, she might be at the Reformed Church of Port Richmond, which is a Dutch Reformed church, where Mary's parents are buried. Andrew Houseman and Mary Mesereau Houseman are buried, and a lot of prominent Staten Island families are buried there as well. And some Bodines and some Housemans and a number of others, Van Pelts. As I said earlier in the another segment, Emmeline was a Van Pelt. Mary Polly Houseman died May 27, 1892, age 82. Mary Polly Bodine, or Bodine, she was married to an Andrew Bodine, and who at the early age of 15, and according to historical record, he was abusive. He was a sailor. He'd go out at sea, come back, get loaded, drank alcoholic, and was very abusive with her, and they had separated. And I'll drop those notes and dates in the video. But he was arrested not only for an alleged murder, but for bigamy as well, he went on trial for. Because in their separation, even though they were still married, and for a woman, divorce didn't look very good on her character at those times, he had married a Sarah Simpson. If I'm incorrect in the name, I will drop that in the video as well. But she herself was found beaten to death in a Manhattan room, and he went on trial for the bigamy and was found guilty and sent to Sing Sing prison, where he himself died. I think he was beaten to death. Again, I'll drop the notes in the video. And I do not know where he is buried. From one record, he's buried in this cemetery, but I haven't found evidence of that. And her sons, she had one son, Albert, and her daughter, Elizabeth Ann. They were the only ones to attend Mary's funeral. It was very quiet, very lonesome funeral. There was no ministers or priests, and they laid her to rest. She lived for the rest of her life in Port Richmond on Lafayette Street. Like I said, in semi-reclusiveness. There were some things she did, but she basically was shunned still to that day, nearly 50 years after the trials. And never really, her reputation or character never really recovered. I'll drop some details about some of that. And there you have it. A lot of curiosity seekers come here. A lot of people have written books about her, come to visit. I just wanted to observe and tell a bit of her story. So in the end, we don't know what really happened. And all I can say is rest in peace, Mary Polly Houseman Bodine.